Imagine this. You have just beat the opening tutorial section of The Witcher 3, and now have gained access to a larger open world. The game takes you to the countryside. As the camera pans to bodies dressed in military armor hanging from dead trees, as you push forward, you come across a village with houses destroyed and burnt. The war between the Nilfgaardian Empire and Northern Kingdoms isn't delivered to you primarily through cutscenes. However, it's delivered through villages, burnt houses, refugee camps by the road. A child's toy in the mud outside of a farmhouse that has no roof anymore. And just like that, without any long drawn out dialogue cutscene, you already feel the weight of a brutal war that has swept through these lands and destroyed lives. That right there is environmental storytelling. For narrative games, this characteristic has become essential to crafting an interesting experience that reels gamers into not just the main story of the game, but the overarching stories revolving around the curated world.
According to Brandon Dolinsky, environmental storytelling is a game design technique that embeds narrative elements directly into the tangible environment of a game's world through the use of visual and audio cues. By integrating narrative information into objects, colors, architecture, decay, placement, and ambience, the environment itself becomes a medium for storytelling. While both film and literature employ similar techniques, audiences in these mediums remain spectators who are told or shown a story from a fixed perspective. This is where video games are distinct. Games can transform this formula into something far richer and more immersive. While playing a game, you're not simply watching someone else experience the story. Instead, you choose what to explore, how long to engage with it, and what to do next. This agency over the flow of your own playthrough means that when the environment tells a story, it feels as though you discovered it yourself rather than having it presented directly to you. The personal satisfaction and sense of immersion that come from uncovering stories embedded within a game's environment are what make video games uniquely suited to environmental storytelling. For this reason, all narrative driven games should consider environmental storytelling as a key component of their level design.
A prime example of this is the genius behind the storytelling in From Software's Dark Souls trilogy, heralded by Hidetaka Miyazaki, who has proclaimed his own weakness in direct storytelling, as the Dark Souls games intentionally apply a strategy of incompleteness in their environmental designs. Although primarily viewed as an action-adventure RPG, Dark Souls games contain an abundance of hidden stories and rich lore that is found by exploring even the nooks and crannies of the world. In fact, there is a severe absence of dialogue cutscenes and story exposition you would typically see in narrative games. Miyazaki argues that by deliberately poking holes in the game's narrative, players will try to fill in the gaps between their understanding of the narrative by hyper-analyzing everything. And that is where From Software's rich and detailed environments come in. Researcher Maria Andriano wrote a peer-reviewed journal in 2025 suggesting that the Dark Souls games incorporates information theory in their strategy of designing levels with incompleteness. She argues that the more the game withholds, the more invested the player becomes. The sense of uncertainty becomes the game's design, with engagement being in the form of the player's effort to bridge the gap of their knowledge by experiencing all that the curated environment has to offer. The result is extraordinary, as entire networks of communities have taken up efforts to piece the lore of Dark Souls together like a grand puzzle piece. The narrative has evolved into an act of interpreting the clues and narrative and elements embedded in the level environments.
But environmental storytelling isn't just limited to grandiose world building and deep lore construction. It can work at a more personal, intimate, and emotional level with you. And The Last of Us by Naughty Dog Studios perfectly demonstrates this. The Last of Us is an action adventure story game 2 decades after a fungal outbreak has collapsed civilization entirely. Nature has reclaimed the world space from the ruined human civilizations. Naughty Dog Studios uses environmental storytelling to portray nature's reclamation of Earth. At one section of the game, you navigate through a museum where exhibits are still standing, but vines have grown through the walls. And as you enter abandoned houses to scavenge for supplies, every single room is designed to remind you that people live there. There is no character or narrator to tell you what has happened. The space itself tells you a story that sparks emotions of loss for the world that once was. A paper published in 2025 in the University of Colorado details how the immersion found in The Last of Us is so fundamentally dependent on its medium being that of a video game. The author argues that when the central story was adapted into the HBO television series, writers and producers had encountered difficulty in compensating for the lost aspect of environmental storytelling. They could still use environmental storytelling in the show, but not to the extent that video games unleashed the true creative liberties of this method. In the TV show, someone has to say it out loud, while in the game, the world itself speaks to you. That distinction proves the point more powerfully than any praise could. When you strip the environment away, something essential goes with it. The game's themes of love, loss, and sacrifice are not in the script. They are in the rooms. In the blood trail leading to a locked door, the occasional skeleton lying on the floor, and the family photo left abandoned in the room. That is a thematic statement delivered through space, not dialogue.
Our central argument is not just that games are good at environmental storytelling, but that for narrative games, it has become a defining requirement. It is not just a decoration, it is the foundation for telling stories brilliantly and more intimately with audiences. Without sufficient environmental storytelling, worlds that are enormous and beautiful become hollow. The disconnect of the world to the player's emotional investment makes the game feel like a checklist of tasks rather than a new world to explore. The gaming community calls it the Ubisoft formula. Community discourse has dubbed the term based on Ubisoft's repetitive approach to game design, characterized by vast open worlds filled with fetch quests, base captures, and map markers. And these have not lasting negative consequences, as seen in recent Ubisoft titles underperforming again and again. The solution to this outdated formula is not more content, but instead a higher depth to the quality of the world. Adding more icons or landmarks on the map is not enough to fill in for the player's hollow experience. What is missing is the phenomenon that the world itself has something to say to you, that the environment was written and not just simulated, that if you stop and just look around, something will speak to you. That is what environmental storytelling gives a game, and the absence of such is what exactly makes a game feel empty, no matter how large or beautiful it is on the surface. Narrative games ask players to believe in the world and the stories that come within it. For this unwritten contract to hold, the game world has to feel real enough to deserve the player's emotional and cognitive investment. A world that is only told through dialogue and cutscenes never fully achieves that intimate realness with the player. Good environmental storytelling breathes meaning into the virtual spaces of the game's world. Having a sense of meaning and purpose enhances the overall experience, whether it be the combat, dialogue, choice, progression, or ending. It makes these aspects of the game all the more matter to the player. With the introduction of more advanced technologies to simulate larger and more beautiful worlds, modern titles must not fall into the Ubisoft formula that only prioritizes filling that space with meaningless content. The Witcher 3, Dark Souls, and The Last of Us are all prime examples of the brilliance achieved with unique and deep environmental storytelling. The best narrative games are those that use environments as a stark reminder to players of the weight behind the world they are experiencing. The emotional connection that we, the players, form with the world through the stories in the environment have become one of the greatest gifts brought about by games.